Folks, we've taken on a different position each week with Corey as we head our way toward the beginning of spring practice, which is apparently the final week of March, we've determined. We've looked at the running back room with the assumption that Liddell Betts would be the coach, but check out that video. And of course, the other videos concerning the tight ends and the defensive line. And this week we attack wide receivers. Corey, I'm going to look at this or get this conversation started actually from kind of a backwards position here, because I was looking at the recruiting class for 2025 and considering that this is a pretty thin position to bring in only one wide receiver in the recruiting class, Terrence Smith from Illinois. He's probably not going to be a factor this year. And then Sam Phillips, only one portal player. Did they really do enough to fortify this room?
Well, they lost Caleb Brown. Right? Who am I missing? They lose someone else? They didn't lose anybody else, correct? They brought Caden Weegan back. He could have left. He's returning. I think he'll be used more so on offense this year. They brought their best receiver back in Jacob Gill. They brought their best young guy back in Reese Vanderzee. And then you brought up Sam Phillips. I think he comes in and is an automatic starter, assuming he stays healthy. I think he's that good. They brought back Seth Anderson. Yeah, you're wearing Hawkeye colors, the black.
We transform the studio into Hawkeye Central here.
Yeah. Hey, Terrence Smith's a good ad, though, and I'll tell you why. He had offers from Iowa State, Minnesota, some good receiver schools. Now, Purdue, he had an offer there too, but it's hard for me to call them a receiver school ever since Brom left. But I like Terrence Smith. He was a big addition. Now, had they missed on him, again, depending on how the numbers would have worked out, remember they had to cut down. They actually lost a couple of walk-on receivers to the portal this year as well. But if they missed on Terrence Smith, I could have seen them go out and get another portal receiver. But I think they really like him. And Vanderzee proved last year that guys can play at that position in this offense early. So I don't know. I'm not concerned about that position like I'd be concerned about, that same position 2 years ago, just because of who's at the helm in Tim Lester. I think he's working with that group more than people realize. And I think Caden Weegan's got upside on offense that we haven't seen explored yet. I don't think he's coming back just to be a special teams guy, which he basically was this year. He got very little action through the air. I mean, you see 3 catches for 46 yards and 4 carries for 33 yards. I think they'll use him a lot more on offense in the passing game. And then Dayton Howard's another guy, kind of flies under the radar, but with his size, if you want a typical X receiver, that might be as far as depth where they lack is having enough big receivers. You have Reese Vanderzee, but who else? It's probably Dayton Howard, and then maybe it's Terrence Smith, the freshman from Aurora. And who am I missing? Yeah, I mean, like I said, Seth Anderson was hurt much of last year. He's had problems staying healthy ever since he transferred in from Charleston Southern. And KJ Parker, I've heard some good things about him. He's a young kid, also out of Illinois, who's got speed. He's not real big at 5'9", but again, they got a couple of smaller speedsters like Parker and Sam Phillips. And then, Jarrett Bowie also has played. So he's kind of that middling type of sized receiver right there with guys like Seth Anderson at 6'1". Apollo Payne is the only walk-on, I believe, on roster at this point at receiver. So that's a change. Again, they lost 2 guys last year. Graham Friedrichsen was one. And who else did they lose last year? Besides Friedrichsen, besides Caleb Brown, he of course transferred to UAB. But as far as walk-ons are concerned, it might have just been Judah Mallett. That's the kid from Texas, I believe. He also left, and I don't know where he ended up. I know Friedrichsen went to UNI. So they had to get the numbers down in the room in general. Could they have probably added another scholarship guy? Maybe. But I'm curious to see. Numbers haven't really resulted in a whole lot in the past. So if Tim Lester likes the guys he has, I like the guys he has. I like this room better than I liked the room last year. How could you not? You've seen what Jacob Gill has done now in a Hawkeye uniform. You bring in and even from a volume standpoint, albeit at the FCS level, an even more productive transfer than Seth Anderson was or Jacob Gill was in Sam Phillips. And then you've seen what year one looked like for a healthy Reese Vanderzee. Health is going to be, I mean, that seems to be a storyline with this room, with Seth Anderson, Jarrett Bowie, and those guys. So there should be lots of good competition. It seems like every spring in August, we talk about that position being a battle. But I'm excited to see what this group can do. I like the fact that they have some smaller speed guys.
Is Jacob Gill clearly the number one receiver?
No, not in my mind. I mean, I think he was the number one guy last year. I think the stats bear that out. I don't know. He may have had one drop all year that came in the bowl game. It was a big moment in the bowl game. It was unfortunate, but he was phenomenal last year as far as catch percentage. But I don't know that he's the best guy this year. I think that's got to all play out. They brought in Sam Phillips. They brought in a semi highly touted kid in Terrence Smith. Freshman can play at wide receiver. And again, Seth Anderson was hurt much of last offseason. Can he stay healthy through spring, through fall? Can he get a full offseason to work? What does he look like if he does? Those are questions that I just don't have answers to. And again, they've got young guys who were coming on last year, and Dayton Howard and Jarrett Bowie. Terrell Washington Jr. is another one. You know, depending on who they bring in at running backs coach, that probably has some sort of a factor in how they play Terrell Washington Jr., but they played him as sort of a Swiss Army knife last year between running back and receiver. So he may get some run on the outside. I feel like I'm missing somebody in that mix. I guess I could pull up the Alex Moda would be another guy. He's on. We have not really seen him anywhere on the field. He had pretty good speed coming out of high school. He's a former quarterback. So he's another guy maybe they can figure out a way to utilize. And then I mentioned KJ Parker, who was a freshman last year. So, and then Caden Weegan. So I think the top three in my mind heading into the year, in my mind, Jacob Gill is definitely in the top three. He's cemented starter. I have a hard time seeing Sam Phillips not being a top three guy. And because I think they probably want to have a taller receiver at that third spot, I'd probably go Vanderzee. But where does Keaton Weegan factor in? Where does Bowie and Seth Anderson and those guys? I don't know. That's good competition. I think they've got, or counting through there, I think they've got at least 5 or 6 guys, maybe 7 that could end up being starter guys that have seen legitimate playing time. They have one other walk-on I didn't mention, and that's Alex Eichmann, the one guy that they kept off scholarship that returned, in addition to Apollo Payne, the new freshman from Cedar Rapids. But I like the group. I really do. And I'm excited to see what Tim Lester can do with a full off season with them.
And it sounds optimistic the way you frame it, but they have one guy who has produced significant numbers at this level, Jacob Gill.
Right.
But we've seen good things out of Reese Vanderzee.
We've seen flashes from Reese. We've seen flashes from Seth. Again, health has been a problem for both of those guys. And we've seen flashes from Dayton Howard and Jarrett Bowie. We've seen what Caden Weegan can do on special teams with his speed. I just have to think they're going to figure out a way to utilize that speed on offense. Don't you think, Mark? He was the best return guy in the country last year. I would just think punt return and kick return. I would just think there's a way to get him on the field on offense. We've heard from Kirk and the coaching staff about his maturation, just his mental maturity, his leadership, how that's really grown every year he's been in the program. And now with one more year left, I just can't imagine he's coming back to only be a return guy. And if he's only if he only is really seeing the field as a return guy because he's phenomenal, he's a phenomenal return specialist, but he's just got great guys ahead of him on offense, that's maybe the best case scenario. I mean, I would rather the return guy not be a top 3 guy on offense, right?
Sure.
Just from an injury perspective. So if that can happen, great. I would love to see them utilize 5 or 6 different receivers because they're all good.